It had been nearly 2 years since I married David. After losing my first husband in a tragic accident, I thought love had left me for good. But then David came into my life, charming, stable, and understanding. We married quickly, swept up in the comfort of companionship. Life with him was calm, structured, predictable. But behind the quiet routine, there was something missing, a spark I never admitted aloud. David had a son from a previous marriage. Liam, 22, tall, quiet, and polite, moved in shortly after we wed. At first, there was distance between us. He kept to himself, usually retreating to his room after dinner. I respected his space, not wanting to force a connection. Slowly, though, things began to shift. I started making his favorite meals, noticing the way his face softened when I got it just right. He began staying at the table a bit longer, asking about my day. We found common ground in small things, our love for nature documentaries, a shared obsession with gardening, even the same dry sense of humor. I never expected to enjoy his company so much. It felt good, natural. I began looking forward to those conversations, those moments we shared when David wasn't around. I told myself it was just the joy of forming a bond with someone who is now part of my life. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through me whenever he smiled. There were glances that lingered too long, silences that felt too full. Still, I brushed it off. I was his stepmother. He was just being kind, and I was just lonely. That's what I told myself. I needed to believe that our connection was innocent. I had nothing but respect for my marriage. David was good to me, and I wanted nothing more than to make our home a peaceful one. Then came the night we sat on the patio, watching the rain tap against the glass. I had made us both tea, and we sat in silence, wrapped in blankets, each lost in our thoughts. Liam turned to me with a softness in his eyes I couldn't explain. "You seem sad sometimes," he said. I didn't know how to respond. Instead, I looked away, pretending to admire the sky. But his words stayed with me. That someone had seen past the smile I wore daily. It made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt in years. And, strangely, that vulnerability brought comfort. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, seen. I didn't understand it fully then, but something in that moment shifted between us. It was quiet, unspoken, but real. I went to bed that night thinking about Liam, not as David's son, but as someone who understood me. It frightened me how easily that thought had taken root. But I convinced myself it would pass. I had too much to lose, and besides, nothing had happened. Not yet. The rain hadn't stopped all day. David was away on a business trip again, and the house felt unusually quiet. I was curled up on the couch when Liam walked in, holding a blanket and a smile. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie, something light. I nodded, grateful for the company. We chose a romantic comedy, the kind that made you laugh and ache a little at the same time. As the film played, I found myself more drawn to Liam than the screen. He laughed at the same moments I did, leaned in during the soft scenes. There was an ease between us that didn't need words. When the power suddenly went out, we sat in silence as darkness filled the room. He lit a candle from the kitchen, and its flickering light added something strange to the air, something delicate, tense. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself. "This house gets so cold," I said. Liam nodded and sat beside me. His shoulder brushed mine, and I felt my heart jump in a way I couldn't explain. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "You don't talk much when he's gone." I paused. "There's not much to say." He placed the candle on the table and turned back toward me. "You deserve more, you know," he said quietly. My breath caught in my throat. It was the way he said it, the certainty in his voice. I didn't ask what he meant because deep down I already knew. "I'm fine," I replied, trying to smile. "I've learned to live with things as they are." He leaned slightly closer. "But you shouldn't have to." His hand was warm when it touched mine. I should have pulled away. I didn't. The room felt too still, too fragile for sudden movements. I kept telling myself to move, to end it, but my body didn't listen. There was no kiss. No sudden action. Just a quiet moment where everything changed. My mind screamed boundaries, but my heart was somewhere else, somewhere it shouldn't have been. "I think about you more than I should," Liam whispered. My stomach twisted. The words felt too heavy. I pulled my hand away finally and stood up. "This can't happen," I said. My voice was firmer than I expected. "I know," he said, his eyes full of something I didn't want to name. I just had to say it. We stood apart, two people realizing the line had been crossed, not by action, but by emotion. I walked to my room that night not with guilt, but with fear. Fear of what we had let slip through the cracks. Lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My husband's voice on the phone later that night felt distant, almost unreal. I answered with the same warmth, the same practiced tone. But something had changed in me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what I now felt. The next morning, the air between us had shifted. I avoided his gaze at breakfast, focusing too hard on the coffee in my cup. Liam said nothing, just nodded when I placed his plate in front of him. We both knew words would only make things worse. The silence said enough. When David returned that evening, he greeted us with his usual enthusiasm. He hugged me, handed Liam a souvenir from his trip, and talked about his meetings. I smiled, nodded, laughed in the right places, but my heart was somewhere else. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. Not because something had happened, but because something had almost happened. Liam barely joined the conversation. He kept his answers short and disappeared into his room after dinner. David noticed. "Is he all right?" he asked. I shrugged. Probably tired. I couldn't tell him the truth. I wouldn't. In the days that followed, Liam returned to his quiet self. No more late-night conversations. No more shared meals. He left early, came back late, and when he did speak, his words were brief. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt abandoned. I didn't understand why that bothered me so much. Maybe I had started depending on him emotionally in ways I didn't want to admit. David, on the other hand, seemed more attentive than usual. He brought flowers home, asked about my day more often, even suggested we take a weekend trip together. I agreed, not out of excitement, but guilt. I wanted to convince myself that my marriage still mattered, that it hadn't been damaged beyond repair by a single emotional lapse. But inside, I was unraveling. I'd find myself thinking about Liam's words in quiet moments. "You deserve more." They echoed when David interrupted me mid-sentence or brushed off my small concerns. It wasn't that David was cruel, he just didn't see me. Not the way Liam had. I packed a small bag one afternoon and drove to my sister's place without saying much. She welcomed me with open arms, sensing something was wrong. I told her I needed space, time to think. We sat up late that night, sipping tea while I tiptoed around the truth. I said I'd grown close to someone I shouldn't have. She didn't ask for details, just reminded me that emotional betrayal could be just as damaging as the physical kind. Her words cut deep. I hadn't told her it was Liam, and I never would. Some things were too dangerous to speak. I stayed with her for 3 days, trying to rebuild the mental walls I had let crumble. When I returned, Liam wasn't home. David welcomed me with relief. He didn't ask many questions. I told him I needed the break, and that I was ready to focus on us. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I meant it. I was trying to bury something I hadn't fully faced. Something I knew would never really go away. Weeks passed, and life returned to a version of normal, at least on the surface. I busied myself with routines, meals, errands, conversations with David that were safe and predictable. Liam kept his distance. Our brief connection had vanished, sealed off like it had never existed. But beneath my composed exterior, I felt hollow. Not because I wanted something to happen with Liam, but because I knew it already had, in ways that mattered. One evening, David suggested we go through some old boxes in the attic. As we sorted, he handed me a photo of Liam as a child, smiling wide, arms around his mother. "She passed away when he was 9, he said quietly. It was hard on him. Took years for him to open up again. I held the photo a little too long. Suddenly, I saw Liam not as the young man who saw me in a vulnerable light, but as someone who'd been grieving most of his life. Later that night, Liam came home. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up. He walked in, paused, then asked softly, "Are you okay?" It was the first time we had spoken directly in days. I nodded. "I'm trying," I said, not facing him. He stepped closer, but stopped before getting too near. "I didn't mean to make things worse for you," he said. "You didn't," I replied. "I did. I let it happen in my head." He looked down, his voice lower now. "I thought you needed someone to really see you. I thought I could be that." "I did need that," I said, turning toward him. "But not from you." There was a long silence. We both knew that anything further would cross a line we couldn't return from. And in that silence, we finally understood something important. What we felt wasn't love. It was misplaced comfort, confusion, maybe even longing disguised as connection. It had no place in reality. Liam left the next morning. He said he needed space, time to figure himself out. David assumed it was just stress, something related to work. I didn't correct him. I let him believe his son needed a break. And, in a way, it was true. I spent the following weeks focused on rebuilding what I had nearly destroyed. I invested in my marriage with quiet effort, little things like cooking David's favorite meals, listening more, opening up in ways I hadn't before. Not because I felt forced to, but because I realized that what I was missing wasn't someone new. It was effort, intention, presence, things I had let slip away slowly, unnoticed. Still, a part of me carried the memory of that emotional entanglement, not as a secret fantasy, but as a harsh lesson. That loneliness can blur lines. That being seen doesn't always mean being loved. That betrayal doesn't require touch. It begins in silence, in glances, in unmet needs. I never told David what almost happened. Some truths, I decided, serve no purpose when the damage has already been contained. I learned how fragile loyalty can be when it isn't guarded. And I promised myself it would never happen again. Because some nights stay with you, not because of what was done, but because of what you allowed to begin. And that is a weight you carry in silence.